I think one of the silliest debates I've seen has been over this Cuphead video of a games journalist missing the point of basic gameplay fundamentals. Arguing that the game is at fault here is absolutely wrong. Dean Takahashi of VentureBeat admits it himself. In an article response to the shitstorm, Mr. Takahashi claims that he quote-unquote sucks at Cuphead and ineptly failed to read the tutorial dialogue. You'd be very hard-pressed to argue that he's good at this game right now anyways. Similarly, the core of this diatribe isn't that you can't say someone sucks at a game, because I don't think there's anything wrong with owning it, you know? Many Let's Players suck at video games, and they don't deny it. Sometimes their incompetence can be funny, even if it inevitably gets annoying when you, as a viewer, start angrily thinking, just do the thing. It's right there. Do the fucking thing. I feel bad that the developers of Cuphead were swept up in this pointless debacle. They worked hard on a game and are being dragged into this debate. If anything, I just hope this brings more positive press to Cuphead as a result, since that game is so fucking fun. It all started with a tweet that sparked this back and forth dialogue, which claims, quote unquote, game journalists are incredibly bad at video games. It's painful to watch this. How do they think they're qualified to write about video games? This is the sort of argument I want to tackle today, that if you play a game and suck at it, you lose the right to talk about games on any level. Now, I think this situation about game critics and video game skill is an issue for different reasons, rather than ones based off of personal complaints of the Takahashi clips. What bothers me is this whole concept of difficulty being a problem, like with Games Radar's review where Crash Bandicoot is being compared to Dark Souls. Check out this video where I talk more in depth about Dark Souls' status as the hardest game ever. See, this is not an issue of people sucking at video games, it's how they report on sucking at video games. I'd say Mr. Takahashi wrote about his personal struggle with Cuphead in an elegant way in the end. He said it was hard for him, and I respect that. See, difficulty is not a concrete thing. The word in and of itself is entirely subjective. Something you might think is hard, myself and others might think is easy, and vice versa. By the same token, just saying something is hard is such a hollow critique on its own. Okay, it's hard, but what factors in the design of the game make it so difficult for you? Such a complaint requires some more in-depth analysis as to why that is. Just saying a game has become Dark Souls is such a cop-out for writing some meaningful analysis and offering some evidence from the game you're reviewing to back up your claim. This mindset of writing so lazily is something I personally don't like because it reflects a poor understanding of the game's mechanics and misrepresents the entire game and what it attempts to get across. I think this has a lot to do with the intense workload of many writers in the journalism field, where they have limited amount of time to write thoughtful critique due to embargoes and deadlines. This is a problem not only for writers, but also for the average reader. They might feel put off by your review because you said Crash Bandicoot was now like Dark Souls, which is the best criticism it can get? I mean, Dark Souls is fantastic, so yeah, good on the Insane Trilogy, but the intention of the writer here was to claim that Crash suffers because it's like Dark Souls. Here's an example of what I mean. I think, spoiler alert, the Nest fight from Honey Pop, I'm sorry, I couldn't think of a better example than Undertale. I know, Undertale is a bad game, only babies play it, please forgive me, is a hard fight. What makes this part of the game so challenging is that you've been conditioned to fighting enemies by dodging all their attacks in your red heart mode, where you have the freedom to move wherever you want in this tiny bullet hell box. Much like the Papyrus fight, you are constricted to dodging attacks much like in a platformer. When you first enter the fight, Sans can do a variety of different attacks to trip you up, and it's this unpredictability that forces you to pay close attention to every move you make. On top of this, his attacks do a lot of damage and poison you, causing every hit to count and be that much more lasting and difficult. Plus, Sans can flip the fight around so you have to move in other directions when fighting, and sometimes has attacks you might have never seen before. This variety of attacks and how unexpected they can be, as well as requiring quick reaction times, makes the fight so so hard for me. Does that make it bad? Of course not. This difficulty is welcome and only makes it more gratifying when you finish the fight. See, and that wasn't even as much in depth as I could have gone, but it's sufficient to explaining one part of the game that was hard for me. Likewise, this doesn't make the entirety of Undertale hard, just some parts of it, which is exactly what the game is supposed to make you do. Complaining that a game is hard is not an accurate critique because almost every game is designed to challenge you mentally and critically as a player. There's other ways to complain about difficulty, like saying it's too frustrating or unfair, where the controls don't work in your favor or the game is designed poorly. But the critic who claimed Dark Souls was Crash didn't, and that's where her critique went wrong. She could have explained specifically what was frustrating, but ended with her infamous Dark Souls comparison, which isn't great. The problem in my eyes is not how critics play video games, it's how they write about them and fail to write in depth. If this was English 101, I'd mark a bunch of reviews, including my own oftentimes, for not explaining in detail why this means that or why that means this. When you write an essay, you have to back up your claims with evidence, something some game critics fail to do sometimes. However, this doesn't mean that this is a problem consistent with every game's journalism outlet. Saying so would be factually inaccurate. Game difficulty is not something you say and then you're done with it. It requires explanation. You need to explain the why, the how, and not just the what. This is basic AP literature, so if you take anything away from this, add some more detail to your critiques. Regarding this specific incident and the claims thrown at Takahashi, I find it funny that random people can judge someone's writing ability based on how well they play a platformer. Again, Mr. Takahashi definitely sucks at this game, but that doesn't mean he shouldn't write about games at all. Writing has nothing to do with your ability to play video games. The two require completely different move sets and skill trees. One relies on the points invested in hand-eye coordination, critically figuring out obstacles in your way, and your attention span, while the other relies on how well you can transcribe your thoughts, your mental fortitude to not get distracted, and it isn't as time-sensitive. You can wait and think on things for as long as you want with writing. Yes, there is some overlap between these attributes, but for the most part, they're distinct from each other. See, the other aspect of this is that Mr. Takahashi doesn't often write opinion pieces on VentureBeat. He's been writing for the site since 2008. His beat primarily focusing around the business and technology sector of the industry. His specialty isn't being the best at video games or even giving reviews of those games. Only seldomly, at around 15% of a random sample size of his articles, does he make first impressions or reviews. But more often than not, he'll talk about an upcoming product in the gaming sphere, give some general adjectives, and move on. Saying that he doesn't deserve to write about video games because he sucked at Cuphead, one video game, or really any other video game is absurd in my opinion. I saw someone comparing this situation to one of a doctor, where a good doctor wouldn't be someone who isn't good at doctoring. Well, yeah, of course. Would you want a doctor messing up the tutorial stages on your cardiovascular operation? You only get one try on that shit, and who knows if the patient responds after that. However, game journalists are not paid to play video games. They're paid for writing about them. It's an important distinction. The video games aspect comes secondary to their main career. It's clear VentureBeat hired him as a business because of his skills in writing and reporting on the technical aspects of gaming. Based on his 25 years of experience along with his impressive resume writing for other news outlets and publishing 2 books. The journalism business works like this. It doesn't depend on your gaming skill, it depends on your writing ability. It depends on how fast and properly you can write an article. I've personally worked as a games journalism writer, and I know firsthand how this works. You're given a deadline, someone edits your work quick, and then it's published. Quantity is often emphasized over quality because that's how the industry has been conditioned. Slow output of articles doesn't sell as well and won't further your brand or business. games. You gotta get those clicks. And you could probably see why I never wanted to work in that industry ever again. As a kid, I had this idea that writing about games would be just as fun as playing them, and it's not, especially with deadlines and all that stupid jazz. You can argue that this is a bad thing, and I'd agree, but unfortunately, this is how the world works. It sucks, but welcome to the business world where everything is lubed up and ready to go. My point is, this is why games journalists are hired, and not because of how good they are at games. Imagine if that's how it worked. Imagine going to a job interview and someone whips out Pac-Man and forces you to reach level 256 by the end of the day. Not only would that be very costly, but it also misses the point behind how journalistic enterprises function nowadays. To say, being bad at games doesn't give you the right to do what you're passionate about, in this case, writing about video games, is silly. I don't care if Mr. Takahashi initially tried to say he wasn't bad or defended himself as being jokingly bad or whatever. He was still bad. But his skill, and the skill of other games journalists, let's players, or anybody else who plays video games are not inherently a problem. What I find even more interesting about these claims is a little-known secret. Everyone is bad at video games at one point or another. I suck at some games, you probably suck at some games. Saying you're good at every game, well, I believe you, that's cool. Can I be your friend? I'm not good at video games. I know firsthand that when you criticize a product, one thing people bring up is your skill. I'm fortunate enough to be in a position where I can edit out any mistakes I make, which don't happen as much as you'd think. But even when I'm bad at a game, I can still enjoy it and say why I enjoy it. Take Sonic Mania, that game kicked my ass. But in the end, after all those deaths, I still loved it. That doesn't make my love for the game unjust or take away that I can make a video about discussing mine and the game's shortcomings. When it comes to discussing difficulty, it's all about being fair to the game and yourself. Regardless, I think saying Mr. Takahashi shouldn't be able to do whatever the hell he wants is wrong. He's a free man. Let him write about video games if that's what brings him joy. You don't have to pay attention to him or any other publications if you want. It's your choice in the end to watch me, read his articles, or do anything. I say let Mr. Takahashi and VentureBeat do whatever they want, even if they all suck at video games. Furthermore, saying this Cuphead video is indicative of a systematic problem where all games journalists are bad at video games is just false. If you want to claim that, cite me a study that shows me this association where the majority of games journalists are bad at video games. Show me evidence other than anecdotal accounts of game journalists sucking at video games. You cannot say without any evidence at all, especially statistics, that this trend certainly exists. You cannot posit this claim. This is at its heart a straw man argument where people intentionally state misinformation to further their own ill-informed arguments. Everyone is guilty of this at one point or another. Hell knows I am. But you have to be careful when you state stuff like this, because more often than not, people can see right through it, or people just take your statements as fact. If you want to make this argument, cold, hard evidence is the way to go, not examples here or there or anywhere where they suck at games every now and again. I would think if it was such a problem, we would see a games journalism site being bad at games every other week or more. But more often than not, these incidents, whether they be this Cuphead one or that Sonic Mania demo playthrough, are few and far between. Since I don't want to create a straw man myself, I took random samples of 100 reviews on IGN, 100 reviews on GameSpot, 100 reviews on Games Radar, and 100 reviews on VentureBeat. I watched each review for roughly 2 minutes to try to quickly judge if they seemed to be having trouble with it or not, as well as reading their final summary. Out of those examples, only roughly 3% on average indicated something where I determined the player wasn't great at the game. Of course, the study was biased because I was judging the quality of clips, and there's no way to accurately tell if someone definitively sucks at a game. Such is a subjective critique. Plus, there's other lurking variables like the genre of game, the person's life at the moment, and so much more. What this admittedly long-winded statistical study seems to suggest, however, is that not a substantial amount of games journalists really suck at at video games. 97%, an overwhelming majority, seem to get these mechanics. My evidence points to this trend being non-existent, and the claim that games journalists are incredibly bad at video games is not supported. Again, let me reiterate, my problem doesn't lie with being bad or good at games. It's how detailed and nuanced your thoughts on games are. Explain why you sucked. Explain that shit and be fair to the game considering that. For instance, I suck at competitive FPS games for the most part. I'm absolutely awful at TF2, which you probably have noticed. Here's the thing though, I could improve if I played more, but I don't have the time or desire. So I don't claim to know a lot about it. I don't claim to be good. This is how people are with anything they just pick up. My friend who doesn't play video games once got stuck on Little Big Planet 3. He sucks at it. But we laughed it out and just let him figure it out. It might have taken a while, but eventually he figured it out. He acknowledged he sucked and liked the game regardless. This doesn't mean he can't write about video games. It'll just take him a bit to play through it and collect his thoughts. Shaming him in a serious, unironic way and being actually mad is just very, very silly. Everyone is different after all, and constantly seeking out your perspective to reinforce your beliefs is just, I don't know, it's not the best way to go. If we all like freedom of expression as much as we like to circle jerk we do, then aren't people free to suck at video games and write about them regardless? I don't know, food for thought. Anyways, join me next time when we discuss games ratings and why they suck as a concept. As always, if you disagree or agree with me, let me know in the comment section below. I'm always down to have a chat if you're willing to give me the time and not the anger. Thank you so much for watching and take care. Have a wonderful day and goodbye.